Experts are predicting that the merger of Nissan and Honda, and also potentially Mitsubishi, is a grave mistake. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. Great to have you with us. Carlos Ghosn himself, he believes that Honda is being essentially forced into this merger by the Japanese government. But he also believes that to some degree, this is a hostile takeover, that in fact, Honda will take over this company and basically subsume Nissan into their business. However, experts are saying this is not a good idea. Before he was driven out of the sprawling multinational automotive conglomerate of his creation, Carlos Tavares argued that the global automotive industry was poised for a Darwinian shakeout from which only a handful of global giants would survive. Many people now agree with that. The recent expansion of talks between Nissan and Honda to include a capital transaction and not just purchasing or vehicle development would be a huge step towards his survival of the biggest scenario. So, investors think this is going to be great. Stock price of Nissan and Honda was down about 50% versus their highs this year. Literally nearly 50% decline. When news of this happened, both of their stock share prices actually jumped up by around about 15%. Investors think this is a fantastic idea. I think it's an absolute nightmare. This could potentially be a massive disaster, but it's favored by key stakeholders only in contrast with the fear of a Chinese takeover. Japan is very, very concerned, very worried that a company like BYD or Geely could simply buy Nissan, only for the brand, not for the actual business, which they think is not actually that good. Think about it. The company has made a loss now for 3 successive quarters. It has a $7 billion debt repayment coming up within 12 months that it can't pay. Now, Automotive News says this: I get the industrial logic of scale. When Toyota Motor Corporation makes and sells 10 million or so vehicles a year, with a sprawling empire that includes Daihatsu minicars, Hino heavy trucks, and equity stakes in Mazda and Subaru, it can be hard to rationalize the competitiveness of a Honda or Nissan at 3 million or 4 million vehicles, but dropping by the month. Bloomberg and others reported that a combined Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi would be the third largest automaker in the world. Curiously, Bloomberg's own excellent chart showed it would clearly be fourth, behind Toyota, Volkswagen Group, and Hyundai Kia. That is, of course, unless BYD increase their sales from around 4.2 million this year to maybe 5 or 6 million next year, which is pretty likely. However you want to count it, a unified Honda Nissan on paper is big enough to compete with General Motors, Stellantis, and many other contenders. However, none of those car brands, those car conglomerates, Stellantis, GM, the Volkswagen Group, they're all struggling. I don't really see how any of them are really kind of the gold standard to actually hold up and say, hey, we want to be them. That's working. They primarily compete in the same segments of the same car markets, Honda and Nissan. So really, they're going to be cannibalizing each other's sales. So while one could imagine eliminating engineers and using design tweaks to maintain superficial differences between brands selling similar vehicles, experience shows that the combined volumes and pricing will be less stellar. While the products are similar enough, says Automotive News, to be cross-shopped every day, the cultures are very, very different. And culture is, at Nissan, a huge problem. After 2 decades under Carlos Ghosn, Nissan went from a company defined by over-engineering to one known for cost-cutting and international corporate intrigue and espionage. Honda claims that it's a kind of a rebellious, racing-inspired company, even as it's mostly known in the US for high-quality, fuel-efficiency internal combustion engine vehicles. They're very different and would blend about as easily as oil and water, or General Motors and Ford. An alliance structure with cross-shareholdings, akin to the arrangement with Renault, would be a more capital-efficient way to prevent an unwanted takeover, says Automotive News. But here's the thing. This whole situation is about China, but it's also not about China. Both companies are reckoning with the quagmire that China has become, deeply unprofitable and costly to exit, and efforts to dump that country's oversupply into other markets. I mean, the rise of China here is the real problem. China owned about 2% of the global automotive industry 20 years ago. It now has more than 35%. That's more than any other country in the world. But more than 80% of EVs and plug-in hybrids are made in China and made at much lower prices than in Japan or Europe or anywhere else. How do Honda and Nissan compete with that? Realistically, both of them have far higher costs, and I don't see how joining two basket cases together creates some sort of super basket. Doesn't make sense. Nissan's struggles in the US have been crucial to the company's slide into a third quarter net loss that led to a downsizing and scrapping of the company's mid-term growth plan. And in its weakened state, Nissan is seen as vulnerable to a takeover by a Chinese entity, especially one seeking a backdoor into the US market. That's where the real concern is. Both America, Japan, and Europe don't want China getting a hold of Nissan. The news that Foxconn, the manufacturer of iPhones, is looking for a stake in Nissan is, well, no surprise. I mean, this company is determined to make a splash in the automotive industry. And Yoon Seki, a top-level Nissan executive in the wake of Ghosn's leaving the company, or, escaping in an instrument case, is its chief strategy officer for EVs. He's been in France looking to buy at least some of Renault's Nissan stake. So, it would appear that Foxconn are already making moves to buy a percentage of Nissan. That Foxconn, formerly known as Hon Hai Technology Group, is Taiwanese, is less threatening than if it were a Chinese automaker with close government ties. But it could still be a very disruptive entry into the industry. Foxconn does things much more efficiently and at a much lower price than Japan or Europe or the United States does. And if you think about it, mass manufacture and efficiency is basically the hallmark of Foxconn. Whether Tavares' vision, now no matter what happens here, I mean whether Nissan join with Honda, whether they're bought out by Foxconn, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. The truth is Nissan will never be what it was. Hiroki Ihara, an analyst at Tachibana Securities Company, told Bloomberg News, there are just too many Japanese car makers, and mergers are becoming necessary to become more competitive globally. One could make the argument on a global scale. China has capacity to make around 40 million vehicles for a market of 30 million. But that extra capacity is a massive threat to global automakers, starting with their once reliably profitable operations in China, which are no longer profitable. I mean, in the past, Nissan made billions of dollars in China. It's not anymore. Its fortunes there have completely changed. But it's just a matter of time before the pain for Nissan and Japan spreads globally, says Automotive News. When it does, drastic decisions will be needed, maybe even previously unthinkable mergers. Now, realistically here, guys, if you're invested in Nissan or Honda or Mitsubishi or any Japanese auto company, you need to consider this. They are being disrupted. Their sales are all on the decline. Now, many people say things like this, oh, but their profits are so great. What are you talking about? That's insane. Well, guess what? There were more articles about Stellantis' amazing profits last year than any other business in the world. Not even to exclude the automotive industry. Stellantis was rock solid. Their CEO, Carlos Tavares, who has now been fired, was crowing about their incredible record profits. Sometimes the calm before the storm can be very deceptive. And that's what we're seeing right now. The truth is, the Japanese automotive industry, the German automotive industry, and the American automotive industry are all being disrupted. China can make cars at a much lower price than Nissan or Nissan and Honda and Mitsubishi put together. It doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. The only difference it makes for Honda is they take on the debt of Nissan. They take on all these internal combustion engine factories. They take on the inefficiencies. They take on all these problems. And the solutions, in my opinion, don't appear evident in any way. Simply by combining their forces together doesn't really help anything, I don't think anyway. Now, if this were a different story, if say this were XPeng or Zeekr or some kind of real, true automotive industry EV startup who are able to work efficiently, lean, and have the key core competencies and technologies to potentially take the Nissan brand and make it into something modern, new, that might work, maybe. But as it stands, this deal is bad for both sides.